Before we begin, make sure you have a copy of the poem in front of you. If you're studying from the AQA Power and Conflict anthology, you can open to London right now. If you don't have your anthology, you can look up the poem online. It's in the public domain. And if you want to get the most from this lesson, I'd strongly recommend using my annotated resources on Patreon. They're designed to guide you through the analysis line by line, with detailed notes, key quotes, and exam tips all in one place. You can find the link in the description below. Now imagine stepping back in time to the late 18th century. You're standing on the south bank of the Thames. The sky is grey, heavy with smoke from hundreds of chimneys. The smell of coal and sewage hangs in the air. Across the river, the spires of churches and the high walls of palaces loom against the haze. The streets are noisy, costermongers shouting, horses clattering over cobbles, children crying in the alleys. As you walk, you pass beggars slumped against buildings, their hands outstretched. Soldiers march past in stiff lines, their boots echoing. This is William Blake's London, but it is not a tourist view. It is not a celebration of the city's wealth or empire. Blake shows us a place defined by suffering, oppression, and decay. His London is a warning, a challenge, and a condemnation. He writes as an observer, but also as a critic, using the poem as a lens to reveal what others might ignore. The poem we're about to explore is only 16 lines long, yet in those lines, Blake captures the essence of a city chained by laws, by institutions, by social systems, and even by the beliefs people hold about themselves. There is no escape in London. The structure is tight, the rhyme is regular, and the imagery is inescapable. You will see the same control in the form that Blake describes in the content. In this deep dive, we're going to break the poem down into its core elements. First, we'll walk through the poem's structure and form. Then, we'll unpack each stanza, exploring the imagery, word choices, and deeper meanings. We'll place the poem in its historical and social context, so we can see why Blake's message was so powerful and dangerous at the time. We'll link the poem to key themes and ideas across the Power and Conflict anthology. And finally, we'll consider how you can write about London in an exam, with model comparisons and quote selections. By the end, you'll know this poem inside out. Let's begin by summarizing what London actually says. Blake writes in the first person, "I wander through each charted street," making the poem feel like a personal account. He describes what he sees and hears as he walks through the city. There's no dialogue, no action scene, no progression from one place to another. It is simply an unflinching description of human suffering, given in a sequence of vivid, compressed images. The first stanza is about sight, the physical marks of poverty and despair on the people's faces. The second stanza is about sound, the cries of men, the cries of infants, the cries of soldiers. The third stanza turns into direct criticism, targeting institutions like the church and the monarchy. The fourth stanza closes the poem with a single, striking image that fuses marriage with death. What's interesting is that Blake never tells you how to feel. There's no explicit "this is wrong" statement. Instead, the images speak for themselves, and the horror comes from the way they accumulate. As you move through the poem, you begin to feel the weight of repetition, every cry of every man, until it becomes overwhelming. This accumulation is deliberate. It mirrors the relentlessness of life in Blake's London. There is no relief, no hope, no fresh air, just one oppressive image after another. And while the poem is rooted in the London of Blake's time, its themes remain painfully relevant today. The mind-forged manacles might now take the form of social media pressures, economic inequalities, or systemic prejudices. The chartered spaces could be corporate-owned public areas. The marriage hearse might be the decay of relationships under social strain. To fully appreciate London, we need to understand the world in which it was written. William Blake was born in 1757 and lived most of his life in London. He was trained as an engraver and illustrator, and his poetry was often accompanied by his own artwork. Blake was part of the Romantic movement, a literary and artistic movement that valued emotion, nature, and individual freedom over the order and rationalism of the Enlightenment. But Blake was not just a dreamer. He was politically radical. He believed in the equality of all people and was deeply suspicious of authority. He supported the early ideals of the French Revolution, liberty, equality, fraternity, but was horrified by the bloodshed that followed. He saw how power could corrupt even the most promising political movements. In Blake's lifetime, London was the largest city in the world, with over 1 million inhabitants. It was the center of global trade and empire, but that wealth was not evenly distributed. Many lived in poverty, crammed into unhealthy housing. Child labor was common, with children as young as 5 working in factories, mines, and as chimney sweeps. These sweeps often died young from respiratory illnesses or from being trapped in chimneys. The Industrial Revolution was transforming Britain's economy, but it also brought pollution, dangerous working conditions, and the exploitation of the poor. The Thames was heavily polluted, serving as both a transport route and an open sewer. Disease outbreaks like cholera and typhus were common. The word chartered in the poem would have struck Blake's readers as significant. In this context, it refers to official documents granting rights or ownership. Streets and even stretches of the river could be chartered, privately owned or controlled by a company or an individual. For Blake, this represented the way in which public life was being commodified and restricted by those in power. Blake also had strong religious views. He was a Christian, but he rejected the organized church, which he saw as corrupt and complicit in maintaining social injustice. This explains the bitter irony of "every blackening church appalls." Politically, Britain's ruling class was on edge. The French Revolution had shown that monarchies could be overthrown, and there were fears of similar uprisings in Britain. The reference to blood down palace walls could easily be read as a warning, a hint that the suffering of the people might eventually lead to violent revolt. One of the most striking things about London is how its form reflects its message. Blake deliberately chooses a regular, tightly controlled structure. 4 stanzas, each with 4 lines, and a consistent ABAB rhyme scheme. On the surface, this makes the poem easy to read and remember. But there's a deeper effect here. The regularity of the rhyme and meter mirrors the rigid control Blake is describing. Just as the city's streets are chartered, mapped, owned, restricted, the poem's structure is mapped, owned, and restricted by its form. There's no sudden break, no unexpected variation. Everything is locked into place, just as the people of London are locked into their roles and routines. The poem is written in iambic tetrameter, 4 beats per line, which gives it a steady, walking rhythm. You can almost hear the footsteps of the speaker moving through the streets, but the rhythm is not entirely smooth. Blake occasionally disrupts it with caesura, or with words that demand more weight. For example, in Marks of Weakness, Marks of Woe, the repetition and the comma slow the pace, forcing the reader to dwell on the image. There is also a cyclical structure. The first stanza begins with visible suffering, marks of weakness, marks of woe, and the final stanza ends with an image of decay, blights with plagues the marriage hearse. Both are powerful, negative images. This circularity creates a sense of entrapment. The poem begins and ends in the same emotional place. No progress is made, no solution offered. That's a deliberate artistic choice. Blake also uses enjambment, the running over of a sentence from one line into the next, to create flow and momentum, as in every cry of every man, in every infant's cry of fear. This forward movement contrasts with moments of strong punctuation, such as the full stop after mind-forged manacles I hear. That moment feels like a heavy chain dropping, interrupting the flow, mirroring the idea of restriction. From a teaching and exam perspective, you can make the point that Blake's control of form is itself a comment on the controlled, restrictive nature of life in London. The very structure of the poem enacts the oppression it describes. Now let's unpack the poem in detail, stanza by stanza, image by image. We'll look at the literal meaning, the figurative meaning, and the wider implications of each line. Stanza 1. I wander through each chartered street, near where the chartered Thames does flow, and mark in every face I meet marks of weakness, marks of woe. The opening word, I, immediately tells us that this is a personal account. The speaker is not an abstract narrator, they are a witness, moving through the city and recording what they see. The verb, wander, is interesting. On one level, it suggests aimless movement, a casual stroll. But in this context, it feels almost ironic. The speaker is not wandering in a relaxed way. They are wandering through a world of suffering. The word can also imply a search, wandering to find something, perhaps understanding or meaning. Chartered is repeated twice in the first 2 lines, chartered street and chartered Thames. This repetition emphasizes the sense of ownership and control. A charter is a legal document granting rights or ownership, so to describe the streets and even the river as chartered is to say they are not free. This is particularly striking when applied to the Thames. A river, a natural force, should be beyond human control. Yet here it has been mapped, claimed, and regulated. And mark in every face I meet, / marks of weakness, marks of woe. The verb mark here means both to notice and to scar. The people's suffering is visible, etched into their faces as marks. The alliteration of weakness and woe creates a soft, sighing sound, mirroring the weariness of the people. The repetition of marks reinforces the idea that this suffering is widespread and permanent. Stanza 2. In every cry of every man, in every infant's cry of fear, in every voice, in every ban, the mind-forged manacles I hear. The second stanza shifts from sight to sound. We move from marks to cries and voices. The repetition of every 6 times in just 3 lines creates a relentless rhythm. It's inescapable. Suffering is everywhere, in every age group, every social interaction, every law. The cry of every man suggests adult hardship, economic, social, emotional. The infant's cry of fear is particularly powerful. Infants are supposed to be innocent and protected, but here, even the youngest feel fear. This could be a literal fear of their environment, or a symbolic fear of the future they are destined to inherit. In every voice, in every ban links speech and law. A ban is a formal prohibition, so this could refer to laws restricting freedoms. It also suggests that every official pronouncement, every declaration from those in power, carries with it a note of control. Then we get one of Blake's most famous phrases, mind-forged manacles. Manacles are chains used to shackle prisoners. By calling them mind-forged, Blake is saying that the chains are not only physical but psychological. People are imprisoned by the way they think, by the beliefs they have absorbed from their society. This is a radical idea. It means that even without visible chains, people can be controlled if they accept the limitations imposed on them. It's a metaphor for internalized oppression. Stanza 3. How the chimney sweepers cry, every blackening church appalls, and the hapless soldier's sigh runs in blood down palace walls. Here, Blake moves from the general population to specific figures who symbolize different forms of suffering. The chimney sweeper was often a child, working in dangerous and unhealthy conditions. Their cry is both literal, a call of pain or exhaustion, and symbolic, representing the exploitation of the most vulnerable. This cry appalls the blackening church. The word blackening is ambiguous. On one level, it could be literal. Churches in industrial London were stained with soot. On another level, it's moral. The church is darkened by corruption and hypocrisy. The irony is that the church should be a source of compassion and protection, but here it is shocked, perhaps even horrified, by the suffering it should be preventing. The hapless soldier's sigh introduces another figure. Hapless means unlucky, suggesting that the soldier is a victim of circumstance. Their sigh, a sound of weariness or resignation, runs in blood down palace walls. This is a striking metaphor. It could mean that the suffering and death of soldiers in war is the responsibility of the monarchy, represented by the palace. It could also hint at revolutionary violence, like the bloodshed of the French Revolution. Either way, it places blame squarely on those in power. Stanza 4. But most through midnight streets I hear, how the youthful harlot's curse blasts the newborn infant's tear, and blights with plagues the marriage hearse. The final stanza moves to the midnight streets, a time and place associated with danger, crime, and moral decay. The youthful harlot is a young prostitute. Her curse could be a literal shout or an expression of bitterness at her situation. This curse blasts the newborn infant's tear, an image of innocence destroyed at birth. The blast could be verbal, physical, or metaphorical. The harlot's life and actions affecting her child from the moment they are born. The final image is perhaps the most famous, blights with plagues the marriage hearse. This oxymoron combining marriage, a symbol of love and new beginnings, with hearse, a symbol of death, captures the poem's overall tone. It suggests that even life's happiest moments are tainted by disease and decay. The plagues could refer to sexually transmitted diseases, common at the time, or to the moral corruption that infects society. When we step back from the line-by-line detail, London reveals itself as a poem with several interconnected themes, each reinforcing the others. The first and most obvious theme is oppression and control. The repeated use of chartered shows that physical spaces are owned and regulated. The mind-forged manacles show that psychological spaces, the way people think and feel, are equally restricted. This dual form of control is one of Blake's most powerful ideas. Oppression is not just about physical chains, but about convincing people to accept those chains. The second theme is corruption of institutions. Blake does not shy away from naming the church and the monarchy as complicit in maintaining inequality. The Blackening Church suggests that religious institutions have lost their moral authority, while Blood Down Palace Walls points the finger at the monarchy for the suffering of soldiers and the poor. A third theme is urban decay. The London Blake describes is not a place of opportunity and progress, it is a place of disease, exploitation, and moral collapse. The marriage hearse captures this perfectly. The idea that even the most joyful human relationships are blighted by the city's corruption. There is also a theme of powerlessness. Ordinary people, men, women, infants, are shown as trapped in a system they cannot change. The cyclical structure of the poem reinforces this. The suffering in the first stanza is echoed in the last, suggesting that nothing has improved. From a critical perspective, some readers interpret London as a call to recognize these systems of oppression, while others see it as a bleak acceptance that they are unchangeable. The lack of any hopeful imagery means that the poem can feel fatalistic, but that in itself can be read as a challenge to the reader. If this world is unacceptable, then it is we who must change it. When preparing for an exam, one of the most valuable things you can do is identify clear points of connection between London and other poems in the Power and Conflict anthology. Let's look at 3 of the strongest comparisons. London and Ozymandias. Both poems are concerned with power, but they approach it from opposite directions. In Ozymandias, the power is historical and decayed. The once great ruler is now just a ruined statue in the desert. Time has destroyed his authority. In London, the power is current and active. The authorities are still in control, and the suffering is ongoing. Structurally, both use a regular form, but while Shelley's sonnet has a sense of irony and distance, Blake's quatrains are relentless and immediate. London and My Last Duchess. In My Last Duchess, Browning explores control on a personal scale. The Duke controls his wife's life and even her image after death. In London, the control is systemic. Institutions control entire populations. Both poems involve a speaker revealing uncomfortable truths, but in My Last Duchess the speaker is complicit, while in London the speaker is critical. London and the Prelude. Wordsworth's Prelude celebrates the power of nature, portraying it as a force that inspires awe and spiritual growth. In London, nature itself is corrupted. The chartered Thames is owned and regulated. The two poems could not be more different in their treatment of the natural world. In the Prelude, nature is liberating. In London, it is trapped. If you want to use London effectively in an exam, there are a few steps to follow. First, choose quotes that are rich in meaning. These are my top 5. Chartered Thames, oppression of nature. Marks of weakness, marks of woe, visible suffering. Mind-forged manacles, psychological control. Blackening Church, institutional corruption. Marriage hearse, moral decay and death. Second, always connect your quote to the wider theme and context. For example, Blake's description of the chartered Thames uses the language of ownership to show that even natural elements are controlled by human power. In the context of the Industrial Revolution, this reflects the way land and resources were commodified, stripping them of freedom and beauty. Third, when comparing poems, focus on similarities and differences in how they present power and control. For example, in both London and Ozymandias, the poets criticize human power. However, in Ozymandias, power has already crumbled, while in London it is still active and oppressive. This difference creates contrasting tones, ironic in Shelley's poem, bitter and immediate in Blake's. Finally, remember that London is a protest poem. Even though it offers no solutions, its act of naming and describing oppression is itself a form of resistance. So what have we learned from our deep dive into London? We've seen how Blake uses a tightly controlled form, 4 quatrains, A-B rhyme, iambic tetrameter, to mirror the restrictions of life in 18th century London. We've unpacked the powerful imagery, from the chartered Thames to the marriage hearse, and explored how each phrase layers meaning onto the next. We've placed the poem in its historical context, understanding the Industrial Revolution's impact, the corruption of institutions, and the political tensions of the time. And we've connected the poem to others in the Power and Conflict anthology, ready for those all-important comparison questions. Blake's London is a city of chains, some visible, some forged in the mind. His message is as relevant today as it was over 2 centuries ago. When we allow systems of control to shape our lives without question, we are as bound as if we wore manacles. If you found this deep dive helpful, I'd love for you to support the channel. Hit the subscribe button on YouTube so you don't miss the next Power and Conflict analysis. And if you want full annotated notes, comparison grids, and exam-focused resources for London and the entire anthology, you can join my Patreon. Not only will you get exclusive downloads, but you'll also help me keep making these in-depth guides for students and teachers everywhere. The links are in the description. I'll see you in the next video, and until then, keep questioning the world around you, just as Blake did.